Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our session on Is Forever Remote Best for Your Business? How to Decide. The idea for this topic came up a few months ago when Twitter and Square announced their decision to let employees work from home forever. About the same time, Google and Facebook announced plans to have employees work from home at least through the end of 2020. Outmatch and our partners at CareerPlug, who are presenting this webinar with us today, made similar shifts. We're both HR technology companies focused on matching people with purpose and making hiring easier. But what about our customers, many of whom are in restaurant, retail, hospitality, airlines, banking, financial services? Is remote work a feasible long-term solution for them? If so, what might that look like? And how do leaders decide if this is the best option for their company and culture? That's what we're going to explore today. Research from earlier this year shows that pre-pandemic, only 7% of US workers had the option to work from home regularly. New projections estimate that by the end of 2021, 25 to 30% of the workforce will be working from home multiple days a week. We're certainly at a pivot point in history, so we brought on a panel of experts to talk about opportunities and challenges ahead. Again, I'd like to say thank you for being here. 2020 has been a roller coaster of a year, and you likely have some critical decisions and changes on the horizon. So I don't expect you to leave this session feeling quite as zen as this guy here on the slide. But I do hope that by sharing insights and experiences of other business leaders, you'll find some clarity for your next steps. My name is Brianna Harper, and I'm your webinar host. I'm also your resource for any questions you have during the session or anytime after. We planned about 35 minutes for our panel discussion today. After that, we'll open it up to Q&A. I would love to hear your questions and how you're navigating, so feel free to type in the questions queue anytime something comes to mind. After the session, I'll send out today's slide deck and a link to the recording. If you have any questions that we don't get to today or something that you think of after the session, please reach out. You can email me at bharper@outmatch.com or find me on social @outmatchhcm. So now I'll let you hear from the real stars of the show today, Wendy Hamilton, Brett Jackson, and Michael Billington. You can see who they are on the slide, but I'd love to have each of you tell us a little bit more about yourself. Wendy, let's start with you.
Sure, I'm the CEO and president of TechSmith. I've been there almost 5 years now. We're a software company in mid-Michigan. Prior to that, I was global manager for the life sciences business of a public company, Thomson Reuters, and before that, did consulting with Accenture for 8 years and did a technology startup IPO.
Awesome, thank you, Wendy. Brett, over to you.
I'm Brett, I'm the CEO of Systemax. My resume is not quite as polished as Wendy's, but we have a company that provides marketing materials to businesses across the nation. We have about 6,000 clients across the country. We have 45 employees spanning 3 different states, and we've been having remote employees for about 10 years.
Yeah, thank you, Brett. Mike, over to you.
I'm Mike Billington. I'm a branch services director for Elmo Products. What we do is distribute medical and industrial gases. Our footprint's probably 2/3 southern part of Illinois. I have 9 locations, 14 delivery routes, and I supervise about 50 employees. We're not remote until recently, but I am working on a EDD and organizational leadership, and my dissertation is on virtual teams.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Thank you, Brett. Thank you, Wendy, for being here with us today. The other face you see on your screen is Natalie Morgan. She's from CareerPlug, and I mentioned we're presenting this webinar today with them. She's going to be moderating the discussion today. So Natalie, can you tell us a little about yourself and your work at CareerPlug?
Of course. Hey, everyone. Like you said, I'm with CareerPlug. I'm the director of HR. So we are a hiring software company based in Austin, Texas. But I'm actually in Wisconsin now. We've had remote employees pre-pandemic across 7 or 8 states now, and have recently made the decision to go remote first forever. So I'm kind of right in the thick of this with everyone at the moment, and really excited to be moderating this discussion today.
Yeah, thank you, Natalie. All right, so really quick before we begin, I want to show you what's next in our Future of Work series. Next month, we're going to look at barriers to diversity in hiring, barriers that most companies don't even realize are there, and changes you can make so that you're not excluding non-privileged groups from jobs they'd be great at. And one last thing, today's session is valid for 1 professional development credit for the SHRM CP or the SHRM SCP, so look for that activity ID from me at the end of the webinar. Now that we've introduced the topic, our panelists, and our moderator, I'd like to hear from all of you on the call. We're going to do 3 quick polls to better understand where you're at in the remote work journey. So I'm going to launch each of these, starting with number 1. And I would love for all of you in the audience to put your answers in so that we can better tailor the discussion to where you guys are at. All right, so you should see that on your screen, hopefully in a moment. All right, that's up now. If you'll go ahead and get your answers in. And I'll share each of these results at the end of our quick polls so that you all can see where others are at as well. All right, I'll give it just a couple more seconds for this first one, and then we'll close it down. All right, I'm sharing the answer there on your screen. It looks like nobody voted for not remote, which makes sense for our conversation today. And the winner there is partially remote. So I've heard a lot of stories about how that's been working over the past couple months. We'll definitely dig into what that looks like. All right, on to quick poll number 2. How remote do you see your business being a year from now? So we just asked where you're at right now. Now, what's your vision for this time 2021? Go ahead and get your answers in there. All right, I'll go ahead and close this one down and share. Looks like a bigger spread here, 81% for partially remote and only 13% for fully remote. So that's really helpful to know that. All right, quick poll number 3. What's your biggest challenge or concern when it comes to supporting remote work? I see some answers coming in. We'll just give it a few more seconds. All right, I'm going to share these results with everyone. So 35% here for staying connected and communicating effectively, which I think makes a lot of sense, followed by convincing stakeholders to make a change and balancing remote and in-person workers. 7% for hiring and onboarding. That's really helpful. Thank you, everyone who participated in this poll with us. Natalie, you said that you recently shifted to a remote first environment. Is this what you're experiencing? What's your top concern or top challenge?
Yeah, I'm definitely seeing it validated here. When we kind of finally decided to go ahead, say remote first, the biggest things we've talked about and are still talking about as we go through this transition are communication and really culture. We're very culture driven, very protective of our culture. We had a very strong office culture in Austin that people have been missing a lot, right, since March. So the biggest concern from all our employees are, how are we going to keep that social collaboration connection going remote forever, right? And just to kind of clarify what remote first means to us, it means our practices and our policies are supporting remote workers just the same as we would support anyone in the office. We do plan to have some kind of small or office space once it's safe to do so in the future. We're getting rid of our big office space, but to let people who are in Austin do want to have that someplace to go to, that separation of work and home. But we're going to hold those remote first policies in place. So things that you hear all the time, like everyone on their own video screens, et cetera. So we're in the process right now that we've made this announcement, is getting a lot of feedback from employees of how can we really hold our culture together through this transition.
Yeah, thank you, Natalie. I'm excited to hear more about that and hear from each of our panelists as well. So let's get going. I'll hand it over to you, Natalie, to start the discussion.
Thank you. So I think a good place to start is talking about what remote work looked like, before the pandemic for us, and then what it looks like now, just to get a baseline with all our panelists. So some of us already had remote workers, as mentioned. Some of us weren't remote at all before. Let's just dig in a little deeper to what our experience was there, and then talk about that change through last few months. So Brett, I'd love to start with you. Can you talk about, pre-pandemic and then last few months, what have those changes looked like for you?
Sure. For us, like you mentioned with your company, our company culture is probably the #1 thing that has helped our company grow. Entrepreneur Magazine ranked us in the top 50 company cultures in the country. So it's like, it is what we eat and sleep here. And so when we wanted to bring on an employee, and the only way to hire that employee was that she needed to work from home. And so that was about 10 years ago. It allows us to kind of dip our toes in the water and experience it, and then build out the right systems to put this in place. Then about 4 years ago, we purchased a company in California that we just ran with that. We were going to allow them to work remotely. It saved them like 2 hours in commuting time each day, which just made their quality of life at a much higher level. But our experience was that we got to do it in a slow, methodical way so that we could test and build the processes the way that we want to incorporate team members into our company culture. We got the advantage of doing it over the past 10 years, and then we were able to deploy it at a much quicker pace than maybe others, because we already had and we're using Microsoft Teams on a regular basis and having, video chats, and that was just a normal way of life for us. So I think it allowed our transition to be much easier, much smoother, as opposed to trying to catch up with everybody else.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. We had, I think I mentioned, like 7 remote employees before March, and most of our workforce worked from home 1 or 2 days a week. So it was pretty easy to say, don't come in tomorrow, and everyone was already set up to do that. Wendy, what's your experience with this?
Well, prior to COVID, we had very few remote employees, maybe between 5 or 10% who'd made a special arrangement. We're about a 300-person company. To give you a feel, we had a department that if someone needed to work at home and engineering, they could work at home. But most of our customer-facing people, because of phone technology and credit card laws and things like that, were not allowed to work at home. We transitioned in March overnight, let everyone work at home, got through all the technology issues within a week, and we're still full remote now. And I expect we'll still be full remote come spring. And not that I'm a infectious disease specialist, but that's my guess of when we would feel safe again. And however, we are in a situation where we may not renew our lease, but long term, we are concerned about culture, and we've looked a lot about employee preference as well. And we think we do need a physical office, but probably not 5 days a week.
Yep, I think that's probably what a lot of people are seeing right now. Michael, how about you? What's your experience pre-pandemic and post?
Our company is a pretty traditional on-site company. When March came, we had to change in the office, primarily our head office. The administration and accounting people did a rotating schedule where a few people were in the office to answer phones and do anything paperwork-wise, things like that. But probably 70% of them were working from home, and they would rotate in for a couple days. There was a little learning curve in the beginning, but actually it worked out pretty well and pretty quickly. And I think they're surprised at how efficient it is. Now, as far as the branches, I still have people in the branches, and we have delivery trucks, so obviously we have to have that. But beyond all the COVID precautions we have to have for that, there's not been change on that part of it. But as far as the office work goes, it's transitioned well.
Excellent. Yeah, I think at least we were very surprised in a lot of ways of the productivity. We thought there'd be this big drop and disruption, and there actually wasn't, maybe because there was also this coming together attitude of being in kind of a crisis situation, right, for the country. So everyone kind of pulled together there. But we've seen that pretty consistently. It isn't productivity that suffered, it's people miss people, right, and that social interaction. So Michael, I want to stay with you because in preparing for this webinar, you said there was a difference between remote workers and virtual teams. Can you explain a little more about what you mean by that?
Traditionally, remote worker, you have 5 remote workers, but they all answer to the same supervisor. A virtual team has, every person probably has a different supervisor. It's more like a committee. That's the main difference. And recently, it seems like the terminology is leaning more toward remote. I think a lot of that has to do with you may have 5 different people that are working alone on a job, not as a team. So I think the terminology is graduating toward remote versus virtual. The virtual means that every person on that team has a different supervisor. So they're like a representative and a committee member more than what a remote worker would be.
Interesting. I wasn't aware of that definition, so that's really fascinating. I'm gonna follow up there. What do you see? Like, do the challenges, the operations, how does that kind of differ when you get like into the work of having remote workers versus virtual teams? How can you support them differently?
Well, a remote worker is generally doing a task they would be doing on site, but they're just doing it somewhere else. Virtual teams are usually a collaboration unit where, let's say, the nice thing about a virtual team, you can hire from anywhere in the world, get all the talent you want. There are other things you have to deal with, but if you want probably 5 the best people to work on a software program, that may be the way you want to do it. That's the main difference. And managing virtual teams is quite different than remote because, again, you have different supervisors. Usually there's someone within the team that has to take a leading role, and there's all different ways to look at that. And that's the main differences in the two. I think what we're going to see is far more remote, and in the US, I think you'll see virtual teams when it comes to more international companies.
Got it. Thanks for digging into that a little more. So what challenges do workers and leaders face in this environment? I think we can all answer this, but because I'm picking on you, Michael, I'll have you go first.
Well, first of all, everyone needs to know what the goal is and how to get there. And when you're supervising someone who works remotely or on a virtual team, I think you need to understand that their time frames may be different, and managers need to take that into effect, especially if they have kids at home, have to deal with lack of daycare. you can't say you may not be able to say I need this done by 2 o'clock. They may have to wait for nap time or something like that. Now, I kind of know this because I studied online at night. You have to do it when, when you have a little time to yourself. I think people's expectations of time need to be changed somewhat. You need to be a little more forgiving on some of that or be prepared for that. It's just a different management toolbox that you have to use. And you have to set goals and understand that you're going to get there. It may not be quite what you expect to get there, but you'll find a way.
Excellent. I saw some nods along. Wendy, do you have anything to add to those comments?
It's a very complicated subject. I think part what Mike was talking about with virtual is the difference between different place communication. Like now, this is all synchronous, though. We all need to be available at the same time versus different time, different place communication, which is much more challenging. And I agree. I think right now, especially with COVID, we're evaluating remote and not ideal environment for remote. There's other mental health challenges. There's kids at home that aren't in school. And I also, like Natalie said, we had really no issues with productivity at all, which was a surprise. But I wasn't concerned about productivity because I thought some manager needed to look over an employee to get their work done. We were concerned more for all the other reasons that are going on in COVID. So the fact that even with those going on, our employees have kids at home, we were still more productive. It is pretty amazing and pretty big testament to remote.
Yeah. So Brett, you mentioned, you've been kind of partially remote for a while now, right? You've had this nice decade of transition, and we saw from the poll we did that most people are forecasting partially remote as a long-term goal here. But processes kind of change for everyone when you have some people in person, so to speak, and some people remote. Has this been true in your experience? Can you give some examples of what processes have changed, how you operate a little differently with kind of two people on both sides of it?
Sure. I think that's one of the things that we struggled with, and that's probably the biggest struggle that I hear from people who are just jumping into this right now, that, well, we've got people working from home, but the people in the office have to pick up more slack for those people, or they have to run to the copier and pull something off that got printed, and it's creating more work for the people in the office than the people out of the office. And so then it creates friction and almost frustration towards those other employees. And one of the things that we tried to do, and we continually do, is when we develop a process, we want to build it with the thought that everybody in the company's got to be able to do it this way. So whether you live in California, you live in Missouri, if you're in Antarctica and can get an internet signal, you've got to be able to do the same process there. And not just a process, but contribute to our organization and to the company culture and all of the things that we've tried to build over the last 30 some years. You still need to be able to do that remotely. So even a simple thing, we've got warehouses, and when a product would get received into the warehouse, we needed to develop a new process to let those people who are working in California, where our warehouse is not at, know that the product is in hands and that everything is okay. And so we started taking pictures of those products and scanning the documents and sending them to the people in California. And then we just adopted it across the board, that whether you're sitting in the same facility as the warehouse, you're still going to receive this information in the exact same way, so that we don't have multiple processes running in different directions. And so that's just a little example of something that we had to do, was just basically retool what are all the individual steps of our processes so that it worked for everyone, and didn't create challenges or frustrations well, why did the people in California get to do it this way, but we don't? We just try to take that out of the equation.
Yeah, no, I think that's really helpful. Even for me, as I'm thinking through, we're rewriting all our processes right now, but it was very eye-opening going remote for me, because like I said, we've had remote workers before, but just realizing how much extra work they had to do to even like stay in the loop and communicate, that we just really took for granted. And they've all been thrilled that we're all remote, because they're finally kind of on this level playing field. So now we're thinking about, okay, when we transition back, how do we not lose this equity that we've kind of accidentally stumbled into? But Wendy, I know you also have experience with partially remote workforce. What's your take on this?
Well, so first, by partially remote, I'm not sure if everyone's using it the same way or not. And I'll just highlight this, as I think what Brett said is very important about equality and equal stature of all employees. So when I said we're still full remote, but what we've told our employees is when we go back, we are adopting a partial remote policy where 100% of employees only need to be in the office 2 days a week. And there's a kind of schedule, so teams are in together, and there's a kind of facility cost savings with that, because we can share some space, co-share space between employees and groups who choose only to work 2 days a week. People can come in every day if they want. And what I think Brett said is really important. If you want a good flow of communication across the company, everyone needs to have access to the same digital communication tools, and more importantly, learn how to use them and when it's acceptable to use them. For us, the sense of equity is very important, in that we want all employees to have an ability to learn about different parts of the company, shadow, question, ask hard questions, be confrontational, be contrarian if they think we can be doing something better. And you really need that widespread information access, to do that. The other thing I'll share that made me think when Brett talked about people having to run to the copier. We are a tech business, we're pretty digital, so we don't necessarily have that situation. But one thing we did find when we were researching employee preferences, and I pulled up my data, so I'll share it. One question we asked employees is, what's the minimum amount of time that your team, we call them pods of 4 to 6, needs to be face-to-face together per week? And only about 24%, so almost a quarter of the company, said that was less than a day a week. My team can be fully functional, pretty much full remote. That's our definition of full remote, less than a day a week in the office. But when we actually cut the data by teams and looked for a consensus or majority by team, there were only 3 teams out of 53 teams that had 80% agreement to work less than one day together. So it's an individual's perception sometimes that everything's fine if they're working remote, but there can be an impact to their coworkers, and we optimize for the small team. So this was a big concern for us and how we made the decision. Oh, yeah, I'll share one other thing. In one comment we also get about that is this phrase, doomed to Zoom. If you even have one remote person on your team, then all your meetings need to be via Zoom. It's or WebEx or another mechanism like that. You shouldn't sit face to face with the 4 people who are and then try to dial in the others, because it's not equal stature. It's hard for everyone to equally contribute. So our employees know that. But it's sort of a burden, right? Then if one person's remote, for them to have to choose to use a virtual communication tool as opposed to get that in-person interaction.
Yeah, no, I'm really glad you shared that about how you cut the data, because I think a lot of people will benefit from looking at that way, whether it's team or department, right? We saw something similar when we were initially surveying people, trying to figure out what to do. And it really, the people of the most concerns are actually really grouped on the same teams together in our workforce, and they're the ones that didn't have remote workers before, so hadn't already been doing these practices. So we're working with them a lot more closely and really made some of the decisions to have a smaller office in the future because they prefer to operate that way, where, for example, our engineering team was like, half of us are already remote, we already want to work from home 3 days a week, like, we're good, can I move to Colorado now? So that's been a little easier transition for them. So there's also this like assumption, I think, that some people make that, you know, younger millennials or Gen Z, people who are like digital natives, so to speak, will have a much easier time with going remote. But I want to go to you, Michael, because I know some of your research has been around this. Is this what you're seeing in your research?
Well, I was looking at virtual teams, not for remote workers, but there's about, for the most part, 50% across all generations fit in fairly quickly and easily. About 20% after some mild management and teaching, they fit in pretty well. There's still about between 20 and 30% across the generations that don't do well. And a lot of this is what Wendy touched on. They still need personal interaction. They look for social interaction at the workplace. And a lot of people really miss that. There's a higher degree of people who are anti-technology, even in Gen Z, than you would expect, which kind of surprised me. And there's some people that just, you probably know some people like this. They are great people. They interact well with other people, but they are not self-starters, and you have to tell them what to do every day. They are not going to do well in a remote environment. There is somewhat a generational gap, but it wasn't as large as what I expected. Of course, boomers are probably the worst. Well, actually, it's pretty close between boomers and Gen X's. There was a lot more Gen X that didn't do well with technology. That kind of surprised me. You don't really see the intuitive embrace of technology until about the millennials or Gen Z. But it kind of surprised me that a lot of these traits are across all generations, especially the anti-technology thing. That really surprised me. I thought we get the Gen Z, that would be pretty much gone. It isn't. I'm not quite sure why, but it shows up in the testing.
That's really interesting. Wendy, I believe you hire a lot of young professionals at your company. What's your take on this?
Yeah, I agree. It's not what the media would lead you to believe. Most of our recruiting pipeline starts with college interns. We do nearly all entry-level hires out of college or community college and develop from within. So this question about remote and what do the newest generation of graduates and recruit expect and want from an employer was important to us. So we actually talked to two intern classes and took some informal polls, and only about 1 out of 5 would strongly consider a remote job, and maybe 2 out of 5 would consider it at all. So what we saw is that people graduating from college, they were looking forward to a corporate community, having coworkers, building new relationships. Maybe actually it was a big fear for them to be able to develop that if they're in a new city, a new area. And being remote didn't necessarily appeal to them. Where we actually have the remote demand from isn't recruiting. It's our experienced employees. So they start out, they have a family, they have kids, they have more commitments in their local community, and they want more work-life balance at that point. And remote gives it to them, which is our primary interest in it. Really, it's not any other reason besides trying to give our employees more life balance.
Yeah, no, I can just validate from what I'm seeing in CareerPlug's and too on this question. One, it was our class of interns, because we hire interns as well, who were like, nope, we hate this. We want to be in the office. Can we go back, as soon as it's safe, right? Because maybe it's something about, being in that college community and, like you said, wanting to have that corporate community right after. But even just our younger employees on teams were, and still are, the ones asking me the most, like, okay, but like, what are we going to do for social? What is this smaller office going to look like? How are we going to keep cross-team collaboration? And are really getting a lot of their social energy from the workplace and have been missing that. Obviously, a factor right now is the outside of work social has been stunted as well. So I'm interested to see how it'll play out over the next year and what people really want. And we have some time to figure that out. But it is the more kind of, established employees, if you will, people with families or passions in life outside of work who are really craving that balance. Myself included, I moved to Wisconsin. I'm our people leader, but it was important to me to be closer to family in the long run. So it's, in a biased way, it's very, advantageous to me for us to have this remote flexibility.
Can I just reinforce something you said is we don't really know anything yet. Like just, just because our productivity is up now or people say they like it now, we don't know that our employees will feel that way a year or 2 years from now. So part of what this new partial remote policy was for us, the 2 days a week, was a stepping stone to learn from. Maybe we will be full remote in 5 years. Maybe we'll be back to all on site in 5 years. We have to learn and be prepared to do it iteratively.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you reinforced that. It's so true. We're just experimenting, right? I think the best thing you can do is just keep asking employees and communicating. Well, let's kind of switch more to like opportunities, advantages, right? We've talked about some of the challenges that we're all sorting through right now. But Brett, what would you say are some of the big opportunities or advantages of just becoming more dispersed, more remote as a company?
For us, we live in a town of 100,000 people. The talent pool here, we're competing with some extremely large companies for talent. And what we found, or what we're looking forward to, is to be able to go out across the nation and find, we're actively pursuing hiring a salesperson on the West Coast, where our largest customers are located. And so we're looking at it as an advantage because we'll be able to get people, in closer to our clients as opposed to closer to our home base. And they'll be able to be meeting with our customers more frequently than if they were, in our office more frequently. So we're kind of just reversing it and saying we want to focus on our clients and we want to be in their office when they allow us to come into their office and when everything's safe. We want to be in there more frequently so we have better relationships with them. And that's something that through this, we've been able to hire remotely. We've been able to onboard people remotely, and we feel more comfortable that we can go out and pursue that now. And hopefully we'll provide a better level of customer service for our clients. I do think that it takes the right person to work remotely on a regular basis. I don't think it's the right thing for all people. It's not the right thing for me. Like, I don't enjoy working from home every single day. Love my family, but I need some time to come to the office, and I need that drive to the office, and I need that space to think differently. And I know that there's some of our team members who need that time to come to the office and collaborate with people. And so at the end of the day, we're still humans. And I still fully believe that humans need to be around other humans. I do like the advantage, though, that when the right person finds the position and they enjoy working remotely, that it can be to our benefit and to their benefit because they enjoy it as well.
Definitely. Wendy, you already kind of shared the plan for some work from home days, but not fully remote to kind of align with your culture. What would you add to this as far as maybe some opportunities or advantages you see to that model?
Yeah, for us, I think access to talent, like Brett said, is the normal reason that people give for going remote. For us, that wasn't necessarily a great fit because we do primarily college hires. We're the only tech company in the area, and we're next to some really big sources of talent here in Lansing. For us, a lot of it has to do with retaining employees. Again, they hit that 4 or 5 years, and also just as part of our talent brand. Right now, when we do employee engagement surveys and we see is there anything else we can improve on, remote and remote flexibility has come up for years. So it's always been kind of that elephant in the room we haven't really addressed and really modernized around. And this is a big opportunity to do that and really be, a best-in-class employer and live true to that work-life balance piece. The other advantages, this was a pretty big decision for us because we had actually started down the path of building a brand new facility from the ground up. We were renting 5 different buildings, and people would have to cross the icy parking lot in the Michigan winters and things like that. Now we're working remote, and do we still do that? And what the reason really for thinking it through and doing the partial remote policy was to make a size decision about the new building. And we ended up not building quite as big of a building as we were planning, since some of that co-sharing or remote would give us some more flexibility. But also, it really reduces pressure of what happens if we grow. If building a facility is the only situation I've ever been in as a CEO where I have to worry about too much growth, like that's a bad thing. It was quite scary, but we know we always now, if we're competent at remote, we always have that as a lever to do more remote to help us grow, even if we have a constrained facility. So it took that whole kind of ambiguity and hesitance to actually make that investment off the table. That was helpful too.
Great. Well, and Mike, I wanted to ask you this too. So what advantages of becoming or just working in virtual teams, right? Since that's some of your research on. Anything you want to add on this?
As both Brett and Wendy spoke about, the main advantage is getting the talent you want. There's a lot of baggage that comes with that, and it's you have to have virtual HR companies basically to handle all the different laws, and that Wendy also touched on before. It's especially if you're working internationally, labor laws, tax laws. There's a myriad of problems. You can gain more talent, and you don't have the brick and mortar investment necessarily. There are trade-offs, but you see more and more people going virtual teams when it comes to collaborating efforts toward a goal. So there has to be a trade-off, a positive trade-off in it, or people would not be doing it. But don't go into it expecting it's going to be a breeze. It will not be. I can't speak, I don't do, we do have remote workers now, but Brett and Wendy have far more experience on site than I do about that. Most of mine's research, and you can, kind of take that with a grain of salt. Academia is a little different than the real world. So anyway, that's a trade-off, and you have to really be ready to face some challenges. And I think it's also wise if you're hiring new people to do totally remote or virtual teams. I think you should do some personality trait index testing, make sure that they're good fits. Other than that, I think it's going to increase. I think we're going to probably go back to some on site once the dust settles on the COVID pandemic. I think it will continue to grow. I think it's going to be more of a work-life balance. Like Wendy said, after you get someone who has kids, it is a nice little feature to have a little more time at home. a little more flexibility with your time.
Definitely. Well, I think we're right on track to dive into some Q&A with our remaining time left. So let's see if you have questions, if you haven't put them in already, go ahead. I think Brianna is gonna feed us some questions here.
Yeah, absolutely. So now's the time. Go ahead and get your questions in, anything that sparked for you during our discussion today. I actually had a question. And Mike, I love that you brought up personality testing, just a little plug for Outmatch. That's something that we do. And we actually have a remote worker assessment. So something you can use to kind of see how someone would be personality fit, behavioral fit, working from home versus working more collaboratively in person in an office. So I can send out more information to anybody that's interested in that after the webinar. But Mike, something you talked about as we were preparing for the webinar, we talked about access to information and how important that is to give everybody equal status throughout the company, whether they're remote or in person. But what about access to leadership? There's a lot of blogs and tweets and stuff like that about, no more water cooler conversations. What would you predict is the long-term outcome in terms of access to leadership, mentorship, new leaders emerging?
What I found was I was looking at actually extroversion and neuroticism in one of my surveys. Because there's less face-to-face contact, if you're looking for a leader for a virtual team, especially I can't speak as much to remote workers, don't disqualify someone because they're not scoring high in extroversion. Because there's less face-to-face contact, they'll probably do well as a leader as with a virtual team. They have a little more empathy for the other people on the team, probably. The two that are pretty important, I think, are openness to experience and conscientiousness. You want someone who's open to doing this and has a self-starter and can self-regulate their time. You don't want too much neuroticism in any job. A little bit on that, it's not someone that you need to discount totally. Does that answer your question, or you were trying to go somewhere else with that?
Yeah, no, I was just curious, because one way to get noticed and potentially move up in the ranks is to spend time with leaders in the office. So Wendy or Britt, what would you add to that? What happens to the access to leaders and mentors in a remote world?
I'll share. It was one of the first questions we got actually when we released this partial remote policy. It was, through back channel. Well, are the people who choose to come in 5 days a week, are they're going to have more of a career advantage? And access to leadership was one of the comments. And my formal reply was, it's about relationship building. Whether you do it in person, or whether in visibility, whether you do it in person or whether you do it virtually, both are opportunities. You just have to be thoughtful about how you do that, and it's our job as leaders to give you the mechanism to do that. If you're remote, if we're saying it's okay, we have to live it, and we have to treat everyone again with that equitable respect and opportunity. So we've put some things in place, like being able to present asynchronously virtually, like flip meetings, so people have more access to present ideas across the organization. We added like an Ask SLT chat thread, so anyone can ask any question of the SLT, and that actually now is more transparent to the whole company to see the answer, and that's going on. But I haven't fully addressed it, but that is our thoughts and goals on it.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I do have a question here, and I'll just throw it out to the group. So whoever wants to answer this one. Let's see, have you noticed any major positions go away, like an office manager, for example, when moving to remote? If not, how can we reassure the team that this isn't a layoff move? We haven't really dug into this at all, so any insight you guys have would be really helpful here.
I'd say
I'll
there's
start.
one person who doesn't really have any work to do, and we've chosen to keep paying them because we've been remote. But we didn't have a big in-office staff. Cleaning and that type of stuff was outsourced, so it hasn't affected much.
Okay.
Yeah, we just had one like kind of part-time person under me who did office management stuff, and we've kept her on because I think office management, whether it's a virtual office or in person, it actually still requires a lot as far as just like making sure people have the supplies they need and coordinating technology and organizing virtual events. I've actually found there's still just as much work. We just had to like reframe the position.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I have another question here. Let's see, how do you go about building social capital with remote teams? With the remote virtual working, the culture of the company may not be reinforced as often as it would have been with teams coming together. So I know, at least in Outmatch, there's a lot of use of Teams, the software program Teams. There's a lot of ways we've been thinking through what that looks like, but I'd love to hear from you guys, kind of what your strategy is there.
For us, I think what we've done is we've increased the cadence of regular team communication. We used to have a once a month all hands meeting, and we actually were doing it like every 2 days, right at the very beginning of all this, just because we feel like the cadence of communication needs to happen at the same pace as the business changing, and it was rapidly changing at the very beginning of all of this. And so we may have even been doing it 3 days a week, all hands meetings, just to communicate, here's what's going on, so that everybody knows what is actually happening. Now we're doing it once a week and doing an update, just sharing, trying to be as transparent as possible with how the business is doing, what we're working on, what the focus is, but at the same time, trying to highlight those people within the organization who are going above and beyond. And we're doing that more frequently to hopefully spotlight them, show good examples of executing our company culture, and just sharing here's what is actually happening. And so I think that it's almost forced us to communicate more and try and augment that. Walk by somebody's desk and see they're working on something cool. Now let's highlight to the whole organization. I think it's helped in that regard.
I'll share, we always had short all hands meetings every Monday morning meeting. We've actually found, per employee feedback, they've been much more effective via Zoom. They're more inclusive, people have the chat, so it's more communicative and back and forth. And the other thing, you see the green screen behind me, not on WebEx, but on other tools. Like I can use that for background, reinforce our culture, our objectives and key results, OKRs, and things like that.
Oh, I think that's a great tactic. I really like that. Let's do one more question here. How have your organizations managed employees moving between states or countries now that they have greater flexibility? So Natalie, I know you shared at the top of the webinar that you just made a move because you guys were able to go remote. So if you could share a little bit more on that, that would be great.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to. And I kind of kicked this off for Career Plug. We had not made the decision to go fully remote when I asked if I could move. And it kind of opened a Pandora's box of like, oh, does anyone else want to? Should we think about this? So in my situation, I just, worked with our president, kind of laid it out. And that's when we started like saying, okay, if other people are going to ask, what do we need to do? So our process right now is if you are going to move to a new state, you have to get explicit approval. Like don't like move to California and then tell us once you're there, because there's a lot of like HR stuff we need to figure out before you do that. But we have in general decided like we're not closing it down. You don't have to just like move within Texas. You can explore other states. You just keep us really in the loop, get explicit approval. In most cases, we are approving it. I've actually, since my move, we've had 3 other people who are in the process of moving out of state right now, which I think goes back to this is a really good retention tactic, that maybe they were, staying in Austin just for the job. They love the company, but are now wanting to go explore other areas. I actually have one employee who's been living out of like a modified van for the past 2 months and just traveling the American West and working off a hotspot, and it works great. But yeah, at least for us, we're open to it, but there's like a formal approval process that has been communicated and in place.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for sharing that with us. For anyone in the audience that needs that SHRM activity ID, I chatted that in, so go grab that code before the webinar is over, and we'll move to our last little section here. So what's your number one lesson or your best piece of advice for leaders considering remote work? I'd love to just go around the room and hear from each of you as we wrap up the webinar. Brett, let's start with you.
One of the more simple things, I think, it's choosing the setup that you provide to your employees. And so making sure that they've got a great setup at home with the amount of monitors that they need, with the webcams that they need, using more, I like laptops as opposed to a desktop, so that they can move around a little bit more. And so just giving them the basic tools, but setting it up for home and knowing that they may be a little bit more mobile is really a very simple thing. And if they do come into the office, I like having the exact mirrored setup at home as office, so that it's not like I've got to relearn or readjust my setup at home or the office. So that's something that's made life easier for our team, I think.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and that echoes what you were saying earlier about creating something that's equal and equitable, regardless of what type of employee, remote or in office, that you are. And it sounds like it creates a lot of fluidity, right? You can kind of move around without having to change your whole setup. So that makes a lot of sense. Mike, what would you say is your number one lesson or your best piece of advice on remote work?
I would say be flexible and be open to looking at different ways to do things. We're in a non-traditional environment now, so it's time to look outside the way things have been looked at before. Just evaluate all your possibilities and go with what's best, not only for you, but for your employee too.
Yeah, I like that. It is certainly a time for creative solutions. And I think I heard each of you say that, whether remote work was the plan or not, kind of being surprised at how well it was working, whether it's going to be long-term for you or not. And then I also heard each of you say, the productivity has been good or better than expected. So it is a time to think outside of the box a little bit and see actually what's available to your type of company. Wendy, over to you.
I guess I look at it very strategically. You need to have an honest view of how you're trying to differentiate in the market, and how important is talent access versus retention, which is probably lower with remote. How important is innovation and communication? How important is culture? And you can't be everything to everybody. You have to decide of what is really critical to the long-term success of your organization, and then how does or does not remote fit into that.
Yeah, absolutely. Natalie, I'd like to throw this one over to you as well. What is your number one lesson or best piece of advice?
Yeah, sure. And I agree with what all the other panelists have said. Something that comes up for me is just how important it is to get your employees, your team involved in this. Sounds like most people have done surveys, right? We're trying to figure out what they want, but after that stage, if you're concerned about, communication and culture, like ask and keep asking, get them bought in. This doesn't need to be a leadership or HR's responsibility, right? Everyone's responsible for creating the culture at your company. So the best thing we can do is create whatever structure, avenues for feedback or collaboration for people to get involved. That's kind of what we did. We set these high level, here's the vision, here's how we're going to support you. now we really need your help was our announcement. Like this is what we want it to look like, but help us figure out what's the best thing for our company and the best thing for you. So just keep talking to employees.
Yeah, I love that. I really like that approach because it's about, making the decision together as a company versus having that decision made for you. So this has been a really great conversation. I had several people in the chat saying thank you for sharing your insight and your different perspectives on this, complicated time that we have to make certain decisions, moving forward. So again, thank you, Brett. Thank you, Wendy. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Natalie. And thank you everyone for attending. I hope to see you back for our next one. Bye, everyone.
Bye all.